All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. We are live now. It is episode 65. Happy to have you here with us here on YouTube. And of course, later on, everywhere else that you get your podcast on all audio platforms, Apple, you name it, we are there. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, please do. It was with New York Knicks sideline reporter Rebecca Harlow. She was a lot of fun to talk to, talking about, especially, of course, this great Knicks team this year that's finally putting the franchise back on the right track. They're 23-22. Good win last night against Washington. So it was fun chatting with Rebecca. This episode I've been looking forward to for a while. As you know, we mix it up on the podcast. We talk to all different folks from all different fields. And today we're keeping with the sports theme of the podcast. My next guest is, simply put, a baseball lifer. A native of Stamford, Connecticut, not too far from me here in New Haven. He spent 10 seasons in the major leagues. After his playing days concluded, he would go into managing. Taking over the Texas Rangers in 1985, he'd spend the next 7 seasons as their skipper, where he worked for George W. Bush, future president of the United States. After a stint in Japan with the Chiba Lotta Marines and the minor leagues in Norfolk, Virginia, he found his way to New York City in 1996, where he would take over as manager of the New York Mets. And over the course of the next 6 seasons, from 1996 to 2002, he'd lead them to 5 winning seasons, including consecutive postseason appearances in 1999 and 2000. A National League pennant in 2000, of course, when he would take the Mets to the World Series. After his exit from New York in 2002, he has stayed active in sports, and he's currently the executive director of athletics for Sacred Heart University. Bobby Valentine, joins me now on the Mike and Maven podcast. Bobby, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mike, sorry about the delay, but I'm fine. Thank you. And thanks for that lengthy introduction. You missed a whole bunch of stuff, but that's all right. I've done a lot of stuff.
Yes. There's the Red Sox as well. Going back to Japan, a lot, of course, throughout your life, but too much to fit into that introduction.
Thank you.
No problem. So you grew up in Stamford, as I mentioned, and your childhood was an eventful one. Take me through it.
The whole childhood, my God, that'll be your whole show.
As much as you're willing to share.
Stanford Hospital, it's 1950, if anybody knows when the hell that was. And I was lucky. I played Little League and Babe Ruth League and American Legion ball. I played high school baseball in Stanford. I got drafted out of Ripwam High School in 1968. And I got to play a lot of sports in high school, of course, football and baseball. I ran track, and hardly anybody else was playing those sports in those days. So I was one of the best playing, I guess.
And so, you also won a ballroom dancing competition at the Waldorf Astoria, the iconic hotel in New York City. So that's pretty interesting. I bet you not a lot of people were doing that back then.
Yeah, there were a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of athletes were dancing back then.
Okay.
If you didn't want to, fight on the street corners every day of the week, your parents took you to dance lessons. And I danced in all those hotels in New York City, the Edison Hotel, Waldorf Astoria. I won a regional contest, dance in an international contest at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, Florida. It was crazy. It was during those youthful days. And, we won in New York, and that qualified you to go to Miami, and they paid for my trip, my partner's trip, our folks' trip. And it happened to be the same weekend as a Babe Ruth League tournament. So we went down, we danced. I won on Friday night. I had the hotel paid for my folks and I for the rest of the.
Your mic cut out for a second there, Bobby.
Said to hell with the week in Florida. So,
now you're back.
When a call comes in, it blacks out like that, I guess, and I don't know how to stop it from doing that. So that's that crazy story of my youth. Yeah.
All right. So you would go on, of course, to play 10 seasons in the major leagues, most of your time with California-based teams. You would have a brief stint in New York with the Mets in 1977, which was your first foray with New York. You would play for Joe Torre, which is interesting considering you would be going up against him in the World Series later on, which we'll talk about. So injuries kind of took a toll on you, and your career ended in 1979. And there was a period of time where you were running your sports bar out in Stamford, which you're still running now, amongst the many ventures that you're involved in. And then in 1985, you came back to Major League Baseball with the Texas Rangers, where, as I mentioned, 7 seasons there. You led them to quite a few winning seasons. Of course, this was before they had that great offensive surge in the 90s with Palmeiro and Gonzalez and Pudge. And you worked for former Texas governor and former eventual United States president, George W. Bush. So take me through those years in Texas and what it was like working for the man they called W.
Yeah, well, when I first got there, Tom Grieve, who sat the bench with me in New York during the '77 season, became the general manager of the Texas Rangers in '84, and in '85 decided to fire his manager. And at the time, I was in my third year as the third base coach for the New York Mets, also opening up my restaurant in Stamford, Norwalk, and Milford at that time. So I was kind of wearing a lot of hats, and I was running around doing a lot of things. And then from the third base coaching box in Houston, in the Houston Astrodome, one afternoon I went to have an interview at Hobby Airport, in one of the big private airplane hangars at Hobby Airport. And Tom Grieve brought the president and the owner down in the private plane. We met, we talked, we did the whole baseball thing for about 3 hours. I went back to my hotel in Houston and went to the game the next day to to be the third base coach for the New York Mets. And the phone rang before the game, and he says, "Hey, can you think you could leave after the game and meet us in Chicago?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if there's any flights, but I'll hang around at the airport until there's one in, and I'll meet you in Chicago." And the next day in Chicago, I was the manager of the Texas Rangers at 35 years old. And that time, a guy named Eddie Childs owned the team. He was a cool self-made billionaire out of Oklahoma, where he went to the University of Oklahoma and paid for his tuition by ironing the shirts of the fraternity boys. And then he went on to make his billions. He bought a Texas Ranger team while playing cards one night. The owner, Brad Corbett, said to him, "Hey, Eddie, you own all those planes and all those trucks, and you got all that money, but I know something you don't own." He says, "What's that?" He said, "A baseball team." And after the legend has it that after the card game, they went in the back room and Eddie bought the baseball team. And we were in a converted minor league stadium. And all those guys you mentioned, I was the manager when we traded for Palmeiro. I was the manager when Pudge Rodriguez played his first game in the big leagues and Juan Gonzalez played his first game in the big leagues. But I didn't have that pitching formula. And in '92, with I think we were about 5 games over 500. George W., who had bought the team with a group of his partners from Eddie Childs, the billionaire that I already mentioned. George said, "Hey, V, we got to do something different." And I said, "Yeah, I guess we might as well get a new manager." And next day I went into his office and he said, "Yeah, I think we need to change." And I agreed with him. They needed something to happen with the pitching, and I wasn't getting it done. Even with Nolan Ryan and Charlie Huff, who was my teammate. Nolan Ryan, who was my teammate. Mike, I played in his first no-hitter. I was a center fielder in 1973. And then I managed his 6th no-hitter, his 7th no-hitter, his 5,000th strikeout game, and his 300th win. And, in that 5,000th strikeout game, I'll tell you something cool that happened. He had, going into the game, he had 4,997 strikeouts. Everyone who bought the ticket felt that they were going to get to see history. They were going to see the first human on this planet strike out his 5,000th batter in major leagues. And sure enough, he got to 499 and came to the plate was Ricky Henderson, a great baseball player in his own right. Hall of Fame as we speak, and I managed him with the New York Mets, but at the time, he was a star player for the Oakland A's. And one of the most amazing things happened with the count 3-2, and the stadium completely sold out and everyone on their feet. Nolan wound up and threw this 97-mile-an-hour fastball to Ricky Henderson. And as he did, and as the ball started getting to the plate, the entire stadium lit up as though it was one flashbulb, because everyone in the stadium was taking a photograph of this moment in their life, because they knew that moment was going to be historical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, you don't have that moment, and right now it can happen. So it's 3-2. He had 499. He throws it 97. He throws it up in the zone, and the remarkable happened, and that is Ricky Henderson swung and fouled the pitch off. And how he fouled off the pitch, because it was one of the fastest pitches Nolan threw that night, and how he did it with the flashes going off, where I was startled by the flashes. He, as a hitter, must have been thinking that someone was shooting out of the stands. You know, it was like pop, pop, and bright, really bright in the entire stadium. The next pitch, Nolan threw him a curveball and struck him out for his 5,000th strikeout. But it was really a cool event. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, Nolan, one of the great figures in baseball history for sure. A legendary career across numerous teams. Of course, began with the Mets, helped the Mets win the World Series in 1969. So you went to Japan for a little bit, and that was a really interesting foray for you. You'd go back later in the mid 2000s, but 1995 was your first foray into managing overseas. What prompted that opportunity to open up for you?
Well, I managed Texas, and then I was managing AAA for the New York Mets in Norfolk, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And there had never been a foreign manager in Japan. All managers since 1947, 45 when their league began. I mean, 35 when their league began. There were always national managers, always Japanese, and usually 100% Japanese. And the owner of this one particular team said, I want to do something different. I want to bring in a foreign manager. And he hired.
You're probably receiving another call. Bobby Valentine here.
Yeah. Spent the entire year going around the United States, watching major league games and minor league games and talking with coaches and talking with managers to try to figure out who might be that guy, who might be the first American that they've let in to their ranks. You know, I hate to draw this parallel, but it had some similarity to Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, in that I was the first Anglo to ever manage in the Japanese professional league. And
right.
Remember, Japan is probably one of the most homogenic societies in the world. When I got there, they said that 97.5% of all the people in Japan were 100% Japanese.
Wow.
Think about that for homogenous, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's the same, and now they're going to bring in this gaijin, to do it. So when I was offered the job, heck, I was flattered. I mean, I was honored, and I went over there and did the best that I could, and we came in second place. And then the world started spinning fast, and something happened, and I'm putting it in my book, so I don't want to tell it on the podcast. But then I came back, and a year later, I was managing the Mets. Yeah.
And that was really where this is a New York centric podcast. And so that's really why I wanted to get you on as well. We're talking about Bobby Valentine here, the Mike the New Haven podcast. Bobby, of course, managing the Mets from 1996 to 2002, amongst many things he's done in his life. And when you got there, they had just fired the late Dallas Green. And Dallas, was run out. And all of a sudden they bring you in. Now, this is a team that had not had a winning season since 1990. And we're floundering, but there were pieces there. Of course, John Franco was a stalwart for many years for the Mets. He was their closer at the time. Ray Ordonez was coming up. He was wowing people with his amazing defensive play. Edgardo Alfonso was there as well, and he was starting his career. So there were pieces. And then, of course, December of 96, John Olerud got there via trade, and he wound up being a big piece for you for a couple of years as well. And so from winning 74 games, I believe, 74 around there, 71 games actually in 96, you won 88 in 97, which not a lot of people were expecting. So if you had, besides, of course, the influx of supreme talent, what would you attribute being able to turn the Mets around so quickly to?
Well, I don't know that it was quick. It was when you look at the calendar, but it was a chore. It was an everyday struggle to figure out the pieces. If it's Mets centric, they'll remember that in '96 the aforementioned players were there, but the core of that team was Lance Johnson, Bernard Gilkey, and Todd Hundley, and they were in all the three of them were offensive force. Hundley was, setting records with home runs. Gilkey was hitting 300. Lance Johnson was getting 200 hits. And they had three pitchers that they were going to ride to the promised land on their backs. That was Bill Pulsifer and
Paul Wilson and Jason
Paul
Isrihausen.
Wilson and Jason Isrihausen, exactly. And as it turned out, with great deliberation and evaluation and long talks, because the organization, the entire organization, when I got there, was really responsible for that core. The front office was responsible for that core. The minor league development people were responsible for that core. So that's the way they wanted to do it. And I had to try to convince Joe McIlvaine that that wasn't the way. It wasn't going to be, the three pitchers like they had in '69. They're going to develop them from within, and you're going to have the offense. And this isn't the offense. So one of the keys was getting John Olerud to show the organization that there was a different type of offensive player out there that could really be a difference maker. A guy who got, 6 pitches per at bat, a guy who walked more than he struck out, a guy who could hit to all fields and play great defense. That's a cornerstone type player, even though he's not up the middle. And we basically tried to build a team with a philosophy that I had offensively of limiting the strikeouts, increasing the walks, and hitting the strikes for extra base hits. It was kind of novel in those days, but that's what Fonzie became. That's what Mike Piazza was when he came and got us. And it was not what Ray Ordonez was. I know you're wearing his jersey, but yeah, and I like that. But he was a real outlier. Ray was the first. He was the first Cuban to literally jump the fence, and leave the Cuban national team and come in exile and be a Major League Baseball player. And he literally, and I think it was in Alabama, the Cuban national team was playing in one of these international tournaments, and he literally ran after a foul ball and jumped the fence and kept running. And there was a car, there was a car waiting for him that he jumped in, and they went over to the embassy, or to the Capitol building. And, and then Ray became, I'm pretty sure that's how it happened. Ray became the first Cuban to play in the major leagues, and he could really field.
Oh, yeah.
He did things that no one else could do. And
for sure, yeah.
Including catching. He could turn his back on home plate and run full speed into the outfield and catch that ball over his shoulder as good as anyone this side of Derek Jeter.
I mean, I've always said if he knew how to hit, he'd be one of the greatest shortstops of all time, just because his defense was so amazing. I mean, that double play combination with him and Fonzie for those years was just nothing short of brilliant. And if you haven't watched his highlights, for those of you out there watching or listening later on, take the time to do it if you have some time, because he was a defensive wizard. So 98.
And let me just jump on the hitting thing with Ray. The reason Ray didn't hit, Ray had really good hand bat skills. Mm-hmm. So he could hit the ball with the head of the bat in a very consistent way. And if you go back and look at the articles, it makes me laugh when I watch TV today. But I had a philosophical, an open philosophical argument for years with front office people, scouts, and people in the media about Ray Ordonez hitting ground balls. They didn't like it when he hit the ball in the air. And I tried to get him to hit the ball in the air.
Yeah.
Because he's a right-handed hitter without great speed, and hitting the ball on the ground was fruitless. He hit the double plays. I didn't want 2 outs. 1 out's enough for me. I wanted to hit the ball in the air and try to drive the ball into the gaps. And then at least I'd have 1 out that I had to worry about. But with a man on base and Ray's lack of willingness to get the sign from the third base coach. That was another little situation that Ray had. I could never trust the fact that he got the sign. And sometimes I even thought that he goofed around and got the sign and decided not to swing at the hit and run, just so the guy got thrown out and say, "Oh, what the hell you putting a hit and run on with me? Let me try to hit a double or something like that." I don't know. But yeah, he was a classic. He was a classic.
He was 99. He was actually pretty good. I mean, 60 RBIs in 99. He had the grand slam against Philadelphia. Hit 258. That was the best offensive year.
He was finally hitting doubles and driving runs in. Yes.
Yeah.
Hitting the ball in the air, not on the ground. Finally.
Yeah, definitely for sure. So 98 is the offseason. Well, obviously 98 in general is a turning point for the franchise. No, the playoffs did not come that year. You won 88 games again. You just missed out by a game, but Piazza got there in May. The Marlins were tearing down their World Series winning squad, and then Piazza gets traded initially to the Marlins, who obviously are going to flip him, and they flip him to the Mets. Al Leiter also got there from the Marlins. And then, of course, that offseason of 98, Robin Ventura, another great hitter and fielder for you guys. And then Armando Benitez to shore up the bullpen. And from the farm system, Roger Cedeno and Benny Agbayani. And you mentioned Ricky Henderson. And this team went out, and obviously there were some bumps along the way. That September of 99 was definitely a doozy, but you won 97 games. You had to go play Cincinnati in a one-game playoff. You got all the way to the Game 6 of the NLCS. So first for that 99 season, between the Subway Series and those great games against the Yankees, and then that epic playoff run from beating Arizona and scaring the heck out of Atlanta, just take me through really what Joe Morgan, the late, great Joe Morgan, described as the greatest Mets show since 1986.
Well, thanks, Joe Morgan. Yeah, that was a cool team. I love that team. And remember, you mentioned the Subway Series. I'm not complaining here, but we had to play the Yankees twice. Everybody else was doing their rivals once. We had to play the Yankees twice. Atlanta never had to play their divisional foe twice with the likes of the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really, those series took a lot out of you. They were interleague series in those days. In 97, the first year, hell, they shut down the Major Deacon Highway and the Willis Avenue Bridge so that we can take our bus from Shea Stadium to Yankee Stadium. People were backed up on the entrance ramps for 20 minutes as the motorcycle police stopped all the traffic. Yeah, those days were amazing. I mean, you pull in the Yankee Stadium, there would be thousands of people yelling and screaming and waving stuff. They wouldn't let us drive to the ballpark because they feared our safety if we won and trying to get out of the Bronx. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, to win 99, to win 97, have that one game playoff, lose the flip of the coin. I love that team. That's all I could say. I wish I had one more shot with that team. When John Olerud wasn't signed back, a little of my heart left with me because he was just, he's one of my disciples, and he personified what I wanted in a baseball player. If he could run, I'll tell you what, he's the slowest guy in the field other than Ronald Ventura. So that means I had two of the slowest in the league on the same team, sometimes batting behind each other. But if he could run, he would have been one of the all-time great players to ever play. And he was a pitcher in college and a batting champ in the American League, and that whole team was cool. And you know what he do? You know what Olerud, the specialness of Olerud, which probably would be measured today, but wasn't appreciated at all when he played. I used to call, they talk about range, defensive range. Well, I used to have a little chart where I measured the range on the base.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like how far up the right field line he would go to catch a ball and still stay on the base.
Mm-hmm.
How far he could go in foul territory toward the dugout and reach up and keep his foot on the base to catch that ball that hardly anybody else did. And of course, those picks out in front on the one hop, he was spectacular on. So, you know, all those guys were Gold Glove players because John Olerud was their first baseman.
Oh, of course, yeah, that was the greatest infield ever. The fewest errors ever committed
Yeah.
by an infield. And, you know, Al Leiter talked about it. You know, to have that infield behind you, I mean, comfort's key, especially in big game situations. And I think any pitcher would have felt comfortable having that infield behind them for sure.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. And you know what John was great at doing too. I don't know if you remember the games, Mike, but you know I had all these crazy defensive alignments. You know, I was shifting as the pitcher was pitching. You know, I used to have guys running to their position from where they weren't to where they should be as the
Mhm.
ball was being delivered to the plate. You know, I used to
Mhm.
have the infield crash on the infield in without the hitter knowing if the infield was going to be in or back because they would start back. And then as the pitcher would pitch, they would crash in because a lot of guys in those days with a man on third base and the infield back would just try to hit a ground ball at second base if they're a right-handed hitter to get an RBI, or a left-handed hitter just hit a ball to the shortstop and get an RBI, and we'd crash. And Ray was good at that, and John would also stand in front of the base runner because my left-handed pitchers had terrible pickoff moves. Except for Hampton, he was pretty good. He had a decent one. But you remember Glendon Rush and Al Leiter and Johnny Franco and
Right.
Dennis Cook. Cookie wasn't bad. Cookie had a balk move that wasn't bad, but he had a really big leg kick. And I mean, if you went on first move with any of these guys, there was a good chance you were at second base. So I would have Olerud stand in front of the runner as the runner took the lead. And just as the pitcher made the first move, which is the time the runner has to take off to steal the base on the pitcher and his first move, John Olerud would break back to first base slightly, just with a fake, and his timing was impeccable, whatever impeccable is. he was he was precise, and
Yeah.
you know, he kept the runners at first base. All of a sudden, they weren't stealing on us when our left-handed pitchers were on the mound, especially the Atlanta Braves, and that was kind of a you know, defensive element to our game that helped us win some games.
Yeah, he would shade the runner. He would dance back and forth with the runner. You know, he'd
Yeah,
keep the runner
that's
off
the move.
balance, which was really obviously, as you just described, very important, especially for the pitchers. And so, you know, it doesn't hurt to have a great offense. Of course, I mean, Mike Piazza in his prime, the numbers he put up. Robin Ventura was an MVP candidate in '99. John Olerud hit routinely at or above 300 in his seasons with you guys. And Fonzie, I mean, same thing. Before the injuries got to Fonzie, Fonzie was a remarkably productive player. And even Ricky Henderson at 40 something years old hit 312 or something like that.
Yeah, he played sparingly, or you
Yeah,
know, played
when
when
Benny
he was
Agbayani
rested,
emerged.
and he had a really good year for us. Ricky's the greatest player ever played for me, obviously.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of people would agree with that. So it doesn't end so well in '99. It was a great Game 6, back and forth, but obviously the Kenny Rogers walk and the season ended in heartbreak. But you guys came back, even with the departure of John Olerud. Todd Zeal came in, and he was pretty good for you guys in that first season. Derek Bell came in and unfortunately got hurt in the playoffs, but had a good regular season as well. Benny Agbayani continued his rise, and Jay Payton, after battling injuries, finally was healthy and had a productive year as well. And so you get to the playoffs, you knock out Barry Bonds, Jeff Kent, and the Giants, who were the number one team in the National League, I think the league that year in general. You go to the NLCS, no Atlanta this time, St. Louis. You get them out of there in 5. And then, of course, comes the main event. And a lot had happened over the summer of 2000 between the Mets and the Yankees. Obviously, there was the whole beef between Clemens and Piazza. Piazza got pained by Roger in July. And that's a side story into this major story, which is the first Subway Series in New York since 1956. I mean, you talk about it being a crazy time for the Subway Series during the regular season. Now you're playing the Yankees in the World Series. So just when Timo caught that ball in center field, and then David Justice hits that big home run in the Bronx, and you know you're getting the Subway Series. Take me through, I guess, that week leading up to Game 1 at Yankee Stadium from your perspective.
Well, you know, I don't think there was that much time off, was there?
From Game 5 of your series to Game 6 of Yankees Mariners? Let me check that. Let me check.
Yeah, I think there was we clinched it, then they clinched it. I think we had 3 days of practice, but it was crazy. I really wish I could remember, but the city was on fire. Everybody you ran into was talking Subway Series. Did you look it up, Mike? How?
Yes, the Yankees clinched against the Mariners on October 17th, the night before you guys clinched at Shea, 16th.
And when did we open up?
The World Series of 2000 opened up. I'm looking to pull it up here. It opened up at Yankee Stadium October 21st, which I think was a Saturday.
Yeah, 4 days after they clinched. Yeah, so yeah, it was. It was everything. It was what you wanted. It was. It was a circus that was going to continue to have a good act. Everyone's talking about it. You didn't have to be a baseball fan. Everyone knew the Yankees were playing the Mets, and it seemed like it was just yesterday, but it has been over 20 years that during that season, one of the things that goes unnoticed is that Ray got hurt, and so when Ray got hurt, if Ray didn't get hurt, okay, but if Ray didn't get hurt, we would have had Melvin Mora for that entire season, okay, and
Yeah, no
Melvin
Mike
was
Bordick.
coming into his own. Melvin was the dude. Melvin could hit anyone, knew that he could play any position, and when Ray got hurt, I said in the paper and said to him and said to the team that we were going to go with Melvin at shortstop. And a couple days later, he got traded to Baltimore for Mike Bordick. And Mike Bordick's a terrific guy, and he was a terrific player. Turned out that was a nice thing, except for Bordick broke his hand. And we wound up playing Kurt Abbott in the last games of the World Series. And Kurt was a nice player too. Heck, he started against Andy Pettitte, got a hit the first time up, and then got picked off. How about Mike Piazza and Kurt Abbott both getting picked off in a World Series game by a pitcher that my mother knew had the best pickoff move in baseball, and I had two guys in the World Series after we said, you don't even have to take a lead, dude. Don't stand with your foot on the bag if you want, and then get your secondary lead. He could pick your ass off when you think he's not throwing to first. He's throwing to first. He might, excuse me, the SHIT word, but we had two guys picked off. And then we had also an out in that game where Todd hit a ground ball off his foot. It went foul, and he stood in the box, and then it rolled back fair. And Brocious just picked it up and threw it to first base. So basically, we gave the Yankees 3 outs in the first game of the World Series and took them to the brink for them to beat us. So it was a spectacular time.
Didn't Jay Payton have a moment like that too, where he thought the ball was going foul and it kicked back fair. Todd Pratt stayed at third. Yeah, it was a series of. I mean, there was of course the big one that everybody points to is when Timo thought that Todd hit the ball out, which I don't blame Timo because I would have thought the ball was out too.
Me too.
And off the very top of the wall, and Jeter made a great throw home. But I gotta ask you, you were in the dugout when Clemens chucked the bat at Piazza. When you saw that, take me through that moment from your perspective. What went through your mind?
Oh, just that he was out of his mind. I didn't think that there was anything that was a serious situation other than that Roger was out of his mind and he just did something as stupid as anything I've ever seen in baseball. I didn't think of that like Mike getting hit in the head or anything like that. What is he doing? But what I thought my job was to do was to seize the moment. And, if it wasn't the World Series, I probably could have convinced the umpires to throw him out of the game just by making it seem like it was such a big deal.
Right.
I tried to make it seem like it was a big deal talking with the umpires. But, I was out in the field. I saw Roger, he didn't know what he was doing. It wasn't like he was going to throw a 30 or 20 ounce object 100 feet and hurt someone with it,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I didn't know this until Joe Torre wrote his book called The Yankee Years, which is a great read. And I never knew this. Roger went up the tunnel after that inning was over, and he pitched obviously a great game that night. He went up through the Yankee Stadium tunnel, sat down. The late Mel Stottlemyre had to console him because he sat down and started bawling. And he told Mel Stottlemyre, "I didn't mean to do that," which I guess lends credence to your theory. And Roger had, as I told Ken Davidoff, a great writer for the New York Post when he was on the show, Roger Clemens was and is, and I say this admittedly as a Yankee fan, but I don't hate the Mets. I got nothing against the Mets, but Roger Clemens was and is a very complicated individual, and we'll leave it at that. And so that World Series was tough.
But Mike, he's the best pitcher to ever pitch.
Oh
He
yeah,
had
for
7
sure.
Cy Young awards.
Yeah,
You know how
including
good that dude was?
Yeah,
You know how good he was?
he was very
He was
good.
Barry Bonds as a pitcher.
Oh, of course.
Barry's the
I'll
greatest
never take
hitter,
that
and
away
he's the greatest pitcher ever.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Roger Clemens is one of the all-time greats. I'll never take that away from him. So that World Series, it was 5 games, but it was close. It didn't go your way. I mean, Jeter was just on fire that series. And obviously that last out when Mike hit the ball, a lot of people thought that ball was gone off the bat, but Bernie caught it. And so you guys moved into 2001 and 82 and 80, a late playoff push. It was a rough season. And of course, then came the events of September the 11th, which, the Mets and the Yankees, after sports returned to the city, became front and center for it as part of the healing process. So, I mean, you were by this point in New York for 5 years. If for all you old school Mets fans out there, you probably remember at Shea Stadium, they had the layout at the top of the Mets billboard in right field of the New York City skyline. The World Trade Center was featured prominently in that. So when that month came and that tragedy took place, I guess take me through just the aftermath and the mood in the Met locker room and I guess trying to help New Yorkers in your own way heal from such a thing.
Yeah, it's hard to describe all that stuff. It's just a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion going on. When you're dealing with the uncertainty, the fear that brings fear to your heart, and it's uncertainty that causes the fear. Not so much different than the virus, that we're experiencing now. That it's mysterious and it scares you, and you don't know how to act when you have fear of something or someone harming you. At that time, we were trying to figure out who the bad guys were. I was thinking about enlisting and seeing if I could, have a regiment or something that needed leadership. But I was crazed. It was a very confusing time for all individuals. And then as soon as you started get to meet people who were personally affected by the horrific event, as soon as you got to see the mass of rubble that was down on ground zero and see the faces of the people, the soot that they were covered in, and how thick it was, and how the rescue mission went without rescuing one person, and then to have the funerals and the grief and the bagpipes and the orphans and the widows and I mean, it never stopped. It was as emotionally troublesome period that I had ever experienced, and I guess I'm okay because of it. But it wasn't a good time, and
No,
so I can't describe. Playing baseball and all that stuff afterwards. I wasn't. My head wasn't right for that.
Yeah, it was tough. I'll be having on a retired bomb squad detective this Monday, who was with the was not with the NYPD at the time, but it hit close to home for him because he was at the Trade Center that day, and
Oh.
A colleague of his who was in the bomb squad, a detective by the name of Claude Richards, was among the 23 New York City police officers who didn't return that day. So I'll be talking with him about that.
Give him my best. Yeah.
I will. I will, for sure. His
Yeah,
name's
and it was
John
kind of
Sadowi.
weird for me, because the commander in chief used to sit in my office with his feet up on my desk. And when I come into the office in Texas, when George W. was the managing general partner on my team, and to think that I would sit there and kibitz with him, and that my 8 of my guys had been at the Oval Office with him in April, and just talked baseball and laughed and had fun. And now here's a guy who's standing on the rubble saying we'll never forget, and asking me and others to continue to try to go about the world in a normal way. Try not to let that fear disrupt what Americans do together. And the game coming back that everyone talks about, Mike's home run obviously was the
I was
most
going to ask you
phenomenal
about that.
thing I've ever seen. Yeah, but really the remarkable part of that game was the New York Met team and the Atlanta Braves team embracing each other before the game.
Yeah.
Never be done before in a major league game. Never will be done again. I'll guarantee you that. But we did it with true caring of our fellow American and our fellow human being, because we knew they were going through what we were going through, that they were experiencing fear and anger and sadness all at the same time, just as we were, and we were in it together. And to play that game, a lot of the guys, even Chipper Jones says, when Mike hit the home run, he kind of felt good about it. You had to feel good about it. It was the changing of the guard. It was the time the frowns were allowed to turn upside down, and it was done with a crack of the bat. So that's all really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course the Yankees run to the World Series in the aftermath as well, and there those three. Even if you're a Mets fan, those 3 nights at Yankee Stadium in the World Series were just incredible, as well. And so, the end of the road came in 2002. It wasn't really your fault. Some acquisitions were made by the front office that just didn't pan out. Move on, Alomar, Burnitz. So you moved on, and the Mets went through a couple of years being bad, and Willie Randolph brought him back, and we'll see what happens with them now. Things are looking up for very much, which is good for baseball, good for the city of New York. And you did some other things. Japan, you went back to the Red Sox briefly, which didn't work out. But now you're in this position at Sacred Heart. I'm not going to keep you too long. We'll wrap up in a bit, but just take me through, I guess, what you do at Sacred Heart and what you like most about it.
Well, I build things. I build coaches. I build student athletes. I build fields and scoreboards and stadiums with fundraising money. Yeah, it's been fun. I've done the experience in Japan. I don't mean to slight it because it's part of my life. It was as good an experience, 6-year experience, as I had in any 6-year span of my life. But yeah, these 6-7 years here as executive director of athletics at Sacred Heart University, I guess I've done some stuff. I've done enough stuff for them to name a building after me. I've done enough stuff to increase all of the female wages of all of our coaches up to be equal to all the male rate salaries, and I did that 4 years ago. And I've added teams. I have the only women's wrestling team in New England, and a women's rugby team, all playing Division One. I have a hockey team tonight playing in the regionals at Webster Bank, and a volleyball team that will probably go to the nationals, along with 2 of our wrestlers who went to national championships. So a lot of good things have gone. I have a lot of really good coaches, 33 Division One teams, and that's head coaches and assistant coaches. So we have quite the town hall. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, a lot of work has been done, and a lot of work, I'm sure, will be done going forward, especially once this pandemic concludes. And so I've kept you long enough, and I thank you for doing this. It's really a treat for me to be able to talk with you. Forget my Yankee fandom, just as a baseball fan. It's really cool just to be able to have you here. And this has been a great episode, like I said. So it is now time for a segment of this podcast. The only segment that we do, it is called Rapid Fire. 5 hit and run questions from me and 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. So first, you talked about favorite players that you managed. As I mentioned previously, you spent 10 years in the big leagues. Favorite teammate or teammates you've ever had?
Well, that's a tie between Tom Paciorek And Billy Buckner. Yeah. Tom Pachorka was my first roommate in professional ball. Billy Buckner was my first roommate in the big leagues, as well as my roommate in college. And yeah, there's, Bill right to the end was a dear friend, and Tom Pachorka is still a very, very good friend, great teammates, great people. Yeah.
All right. Of course, Japan. Favorite thing about Japan?
Probably the food.
Oh, that food's awesome for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, third, yeah, I have to change this question up a bit because you talked about favorite players that you managed or managed. Favorite. So how do I ask this question?
I don't know.
Most most eccentric player you've ever managed.
Well, probably Turk. He was different. Turk Wendell was really he was a great guy, great teammate. Just had a lot of weird things going on.
The necklace,
Yeah, he had the necklace. He would sit in the trees at 4 and 5 in the morning in Greenwich and clear some of the deer out of some of the private estates there. Then come to the ballpark. He was a classic dude.
Yeah, he's one of baseball's great characters. So fourth, favorite thing about New York City.
Oh, the food.
Same thing as Japan. Yeah, can't blame you there. Mine too. Mine too. Fifth and finally, knowing what you know now and experiencing what you've experienced throughout your life. If you can go back in time, knowing what you know now again, and give advice to a young Bobby Valentine, what would you tell him?
To stick to your guns and to make sure that conviction, along with honesty, is the path that you take. Yeah.
All right.
And that was the advice that I got when I was young. I think I always did it anyway.
Well, that's good. Yeah, it's not a bad way to live one's life. So that concludes episode 65 of the Mike to New Haven podcast. I can't thank you enough for coming by, Bobby. Before we go, we like to just promote ourselves, and then we'll get out of here. And before I promote myself, is there anything that you would like to plug?
No, Mike, you did a great job. I'm sorry I was late. I want everyone to get Apple TV and watch the greatest beer run ever. I'm part of that production that's going to be filmed in Australia in the next couple of weeks with director Peter Farrelly and his Oscars, along with a cast, a great cast. That and if my book ever gets out, buy it. You'll like it.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. And I'll promote myself. If you're watching this podcast for the first time because you want to check out Bobby V, stick around. I'd love to have you. My YouTube channel is MC's Audio, MC''S Audio. And everywhere that you get your podcast on the audio platforms that's out there, check it out as well. It's Mike in New Haven, MIC''D in New Haven, where you can find more great conversations like this one out there. And still tune in this Monday because live at 1 p.m., another first-time author and retired NYPD bomb squad detective Don Sadawi, who is best known, I should say, for investigating and solving the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, will join me here for his experience to relay his experiences about not just the bomb squad, but his really extraordinary life in general. By his book, it's called Rendered Safe: Tales of an NYPD Bomb Tech. You will love it. So that's all on my end. Of course, Twitter, Mike in New Haven, MIK in New Haven, LinkedIn, Mike Cologne. And on behalf of Bobby Valentine, I am Mike Cologne, and we will see you next time.